Hi, Billy. Hope you're doing well today. Congratulations on your film. Would you like to start things off by sharing what Monk in Pieces is about?
Sure. A Monk in Pieces is about the visionary composer, performer, theater artist, filmmaker Meredith Monk, who has had an extraordinary career but isn't always fully appreciated for what her achievement was.
And what inspired you to make this film?
My wife, Katie Geisinger, began singing and performing with Meredith in 1990 on Atlas, which was now considered kind of her masterpiece, and has been performing with Meredith ever since. So I've gotten to know Meredith and her work over many years. And I thought I love the music. So that was kind of the initial inspiration. But also, I was very inspired by her personal story, and I felt it would make a great film. So I asked her and she agreed.
And how did this time tested personal connection influence your approach?
I'll start by saying she was incredibly generous in the sense of giving me the space to make my own interpretation and make my own film. She did not, she allowed me to be independent editorially. In terms of the influence of her work on the film, her work in the theater and in film is takes what I would call a mosaic approach. It's not linear A, B, C, D narrative. So I decided very early on that I wanted to take the same approach with the film. I didn't want it to be a standard biopic with a linear narrative. I chose pieces and I actually built each piece around one of her compositions and tried to make it a unique window on her work and her life.
On the topic of that mosaic approach, what were some of the challenges and rewards that came with this narrative style?
So it's a big challenge because once you let go of having a traditional linear narrative, you still need to find a way to draw people through, through a story. So it's in some ways more of a challenge that way. You have to really think about what's the order of the pieces, and even if the story is not obvious, you're kind of telling yourself a story as you piece it together. That was a big challenge, but very, very rewarding in the end. And a lot of that is because at a certain point, I was able to begin working with a wonderful editor named Sabina Cryan Bule, and she really worked with me on making those sort of creating those through lines, even though it was not a linear narrative.
You had access to a rich archive of film, photos, notebooks, and music. Was there a particular discovery that changed the way you saw Monk or influenced the direction of the film?
So many. It was such a pleasure to go through the archive, and it was all over the place. I mean, there were some in the sort of deep in the recesses of the New York Public Library, Performing Arts Library. There were TV programs and films that had been made all over the world, especially in Germany, and everyone was this kind of delightful discovery. But if I had to kind of pick a few, or maybe two, one of them was we did find like the original 16 millimeter reel of Meredith's. She was the first person to stage a live performance in the rotunda of the Guggenheim Museum in New York in 1969. And we found that kind of in the bowels of Meredith's, archives, they had the original film reel, and it had never been really properly transferred, digitized. So we did that and made a whole chapter out of that. So that would be one. And then the other would be, there was a concert in Bonn, Germany in 1989 that she did. It was with two pianos. And it's one of the most joyful, beautiful performances I've ever seen of Meredith. You just really feel a kind of radiance coming from her. And I kind of smile every time I see it. And that was produced for German television. And we were able to track down like a really good copy of the original video, and that we used it in two different chapters. So those are two examples. It was just constant discovery of really some beautiful stuff.
Monk in Pieces really captures the rhythms of Monk's creative process. What struck you the most about how she approaches music?
So I think what's unique about her approach is the way that she works with collaborators, with the members of her ensemble. And I saw this firsthand because my wife has been in her ensemble for like 30 years. And what she does is quite extraordinary. She really tailors her compositions and creates her pieces based on the individual strengths of her performers. As a performer, the reason my wife Katie loves working with her is that everything is tailored to her skills, her body, her abilities to move, her vocal range. And I think that really makes it unique. Everything evolves and develops. One of the chapters is about the first time she was invited to bring a work to a traditional opera house, Houston Grand Opera, and this was the original Atlas in 1989. They really didn't know what to do with her because she's like, I need 8 weeks to develop this piece with my performers. And they were like used to doing Tosca or traditional operas where it's like you bring in the score and the singers sing from the score, and you rehearse for a couple of weeks and you're done. And with Meredith, there is no score. If there is, it's later after the music's been developed. So that was, that's also quite unique that she develops her work almost like by a oral transmission rather than a written score.
And how did you portray the full effect of the critics' hostility towards Meredith in her early career?
So that was an interesting challenge, and I think it's a big part of the story, which is that there were some really disparaging, sometimes mean-spirited reviews of her work by critics, mainstream critics who didn't understand her work. So this is where working with Paul Barrett, who was the animator, really took me to a wonderful place because we had an idea, war of words. How do you visually show the kind of struggle and the attacks, with text? So he found these amazing ways to animate text. He actually was inspired by the constructivist art movement, which did various text treatments in really interesting ways. So it was about making the text like be an assault, and I think that was kind of the approach, and I think Paul did an amazing job with it.
And do you see parallels of Meredith's experience in today's artistic landscape?
The environment that she came up in, which was this 60s and 70s downtown New York art scene, was a kind of unique moment in history. I mean, it was this period of where you could get a big loft in Soho or Tribeca and do performances there, and I think that moment is gone. I think it's much harder now to do the kind of thing that she did. It was a time when there was a lot of cross-pollination between different art forms. So I think in some ways she really opened up those possibilities of crossing boundaries through her work, by setting an example. But it's not easy to do that again. In some ways, she was part of a really unique moment in the history of performing arts.
And what do you hope audiences will take away from Monk in pieces, especially those who are not too familiar with Monk but have heard of her work?
Yeah, I think that for people who have never heard of her, and that's a lot of people, that this would be like a real immersion in her work, and especially putting the music forward I tried to make it in a way you really experience the musical work that she's done. So, and then I also feel that for people who know her work, this will deepen their understanding and broaden their understanding of her contribution, because she's had a really profound influence on so many artists. In some ways, she's an artist's artist, and yet she's really kind of under-recognized or underappreciated, I would say. Even, now she's, I think, just coming into the sort of public consciousness. And in some ways, she's already part of even popular culture because people have used her music. Now it's on, TV shows and films and so on. But it was a long road to get there.
And lastly, on the subject of public consciousness, now that Monk in Pieces is out in the world, do you see her legacy being different than when you first began the project?
There's a chapter in the film where you see her kind of letting go of her masterpiece, Atlas, for the first time, handing it off to another director, handing it off to another young performer who's going to do the role that she used to do. And that process of letting go is happening, and that's really what will constitute her legacy. And I think it's a very difficult thing for an artist to do, especially one where she's used to having directed and performed in everything that she's done her whole life. And now she has to kind of let go of that and let other people take it up. And I think the film is part of that. The film will have a life of its own. And it was something that she didn't kind of wasn't able to control. She actually gave me the freedom to put my own interpretation on her work and her life, and it will have its own life. And I think that's I hope she considers that an important part of her legacy. But I think it will be. I really hope so.
That's beautifully said. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.